Everyone, welcome to another Animation Friday, and today I'm going to be discussing something very interesting, and that involves the animation styles, in particular in how the characters are drawn, because that's, I think, something that has a lot of variety, but also offers some interesting takes as to how people perceive these various characters that they're sort of forming and what they're trying to um, get across to the audience as far as their environment is concerned. And I think a lot of that can be really showcased on a visual level. So without further ado, let me address some interesting things that I kind of discovered as I was doing a little bit of research on this topic. Apologize, this video had to be uploaded late, but I was unfortunately busy this weekend and expect usually sometimes Fridays and Saturdays video to be delayed. But without further ado, when you really look at the animation spectrum as far as styles are concerned, you will notice that there's obviously 2D and then there's 3D, but there's actually a lot of different variations into which these two mediums are kind of showcased. Um, and you'll see too how even in commercials now they're starting to utilize animation a lot more so than previously. So there is a lot of variety that exists into how these characters are kind of designed and drawn. And the interesting thing too is when you look at television in particular, you will notice that the style has a lot more variety. You no television show really looks exactly the same as another. You could probably make exceptions for ones that involved, in particular, the Disney characters that we all know and have grown up with, probably. But when you really look at the large spectrum of cartoons that are out there, there's a very unique style to all of them, and they really do try to showcase that creativity fairly well. And I think it's rather interesting to just see how varied they've become. There's almost it's interesting because sometimes these shows even take real people and sort of make them into animated cartoons. Like you'll see this on Family Guy, South Park as well. They'll try to showcase a real character within their animated style format, and it really shows you like how the animators are really playing around with the whole design element of animation and that style. And it's very interesting, and it's so vast and so expansive that there's really no limits. And I think that's great that we're seeing these kinds of different styles coming about. But I would say these styles are not as uh, filled or consist of a lot of variety within film, largely due to the fact that we do have three big main studios really who are making animated films, and usually, for the most part, I think studios like to stick with their own kind of style and their own way of executing animation. Like you'll notice Disney characters look fairly similar to one another, even though they maybe have, a different race or a different ethnic background. Largely they are drawn in a similar way. Like they don't try to be out of whack as far as the style is concerned. And you could kind of describe the style almost too, I think, largely when you look at Disney. For example, their human characters, or at least even sometimes their animal characters too, have kind of like these, they're not overly large eyes, but they're kind of big eyes, sort of innocent eyes, doughy eyes, for the protagonist, largely I think due to the fact that they want to accentuate that friendliness. And I think that's somewhat self-explanatory and makes sense from a child perspective, because largely children base things, I think, on a visual medium because they haven't really absorbed language or or in-depth personality, so they really do visualize the kind of impression that people are giving off. And I think it makes sense that Disney would try to make those very friendly eyes to their main characters that you want to ultimately root for, and then give these kinds of threatening, piercing images to the villains. I think it only makes sense because it's instilling in the mind of children the understanding of how to understand like certain emotions and certain behavior, I think, too, because it's not only the way in which that they're stylized and drawn, it's also their actions as well, and sort of their presence on camera. So I think that's really something that's very important to note. And the interesting thing too is that Disney tries to display, I think, this more realistic approach with the way they draw things. You will see this largely with Bambi, where they did try to make things relatively realistic as far as when drawing all the different animals. Although they didn't appear as realistic within Snow White, I think there is this sort of idea that we're going to try to accentuate the kind of beauty that the animals sort of display. You know, we're not gonna draw them like something, you know, that just came out of that you kind of know as a cartoon. It almost seemed like Disney wanted to make something that was a little bit more, I guess you could consider, higher art, in the sense that they did want to try to give those very kind of delicate and realistic appearances. And largely that's through their human characters as well. A lot of their human characters are relatively realistic when you look at the faces, the way in which they showcase their expressions, you know. It all just flows very well. And obviously, there's been some deviations that Disney's done over the years. A perfect example of this would be Hercules. Like, if you look at that style of animation, you can clearly see that it doesn't look like anything that Disney, you know, has really delved into all that much. So really, when you really look at the consistency of their style, you'll notice these patterns of the fact that they do try to be a little bit more realistic. There's a little bit of a more of a level of innocence to it, and it's also trying to showcase a friendliness to those protagonists, and also trying to make the villains very menacing and dark and sinister. So they do seem to say that. And there's also a level of cuteness to Disney too, like in the way in which and I think this goes in largely with the innocence too. They try to make everything feel very, very lighthearted, very fluffy and flow well, and you know, you feel like you're going to have a good time a lot of the time when you're looking at the artistry behind a lot of Disney films, because it is largely based on trying to create that sort of environment, you know, the environment of beauty and fantasy, you know, it's really trying to bring that to the forefront. And even with their other films that have sort of deviated from the fairy tale fantasy kind of esque formula, you'll see that there is sort of this relatively realistic approach to showcasing their characters. Like when you look at the Lion King, like the lions, they look like genuine lions. You know, there is this sense of that they are trying to immerse themselves within a kind of environment and trying to use actual people. And they really did use actual people as part of, you know, really showcasing the style and the movement, because that was really at the forefront of their whole artistry, was to showcase actual people and have them sort of move around, and then the artist would draw them, and sort of make a cartoon version out of it. And I think Disney really has stuck to this. I think even if you look at their current CGI films, you'll notice too that largely, in the most part, most of these characters look fairly human, or they do look like or they do look kind of like they're trying to get across a certain animal, or it doesn't feel like it just doesn't try to give the sense of, yeah, this is a cartoon, even though it is. It tries to go kind of that extra mile and trying to be a little bit more realistic in that sense. And I think it only makes sense to the Disney brand, especially since they do have all these big park establishments and all of that. It would only make sense that they would try to put in some kind of more realistic approach into their characters, since they try to make their characters real life by, having them showcased constantly throughout the parks. And this is also a perfect contrast to Disney's style, DreamWorks, because DreamWorks' style is very comedic. It's very goofy. The characters look kind of out of whack. They don't look like actual people. Largely, they try not to focus too much on the pleasantness, but rather the kind of comedic effect that the character gives off. And although they do display a sense of friendliness and, they kind of try to make their characters fairly open and welcoming, at least their protagonists, with the way that they're drawn. I don't think they don't present as much detail as the Disney animation does. And I think style is something that's very important, because animation is a very visual medium. It's probably the most visual medium that you have, because you're literally creating the character from scratch. And, when you're just kind of doing this cardboard comic character, it kind of comes off as a little artificial to me. But I do understand the style, because I understand that's what DreamWorks really is supposed to be. It's designed. They are the people that do say, yeah, we are cartoons. Yes, we are. We are something that's not real. We embrace the zany and the goofy and the outrageous and ridiculous, and there is a lot of fun that can be had with that, and I think that really works well for their brand. And you'll notice this too, like there's just the way the characters are drawn. They're not. They're just kind of goofy. They're not. There's a lot of edging. They're not really that smoothly drawn. They're kind of more along the sides of being a little bit more on the obnoxious. The style is, it's kind of all over the place. It's not like Disney, where it's very picturesque. And because with DreamWorks, it's all just about the kind of spectacle and the very eccentric and unrealistic nature of animation. So I think that's really what you can really tell as far as the differences is in style. And I think usually those kinds of styles sort of, they kind of are I guess you could say, the two main styles of, really kids animation. It's either the animation is more flowy, it's more serious, dramatic, beautiful, artistic, or you have the comedic, zany, goofy, has sharp edges everywhere, so those are really the two, I think, main styles to get across. And then there's also anime, and I almost want to say anime is probably a blend of these two really big styles, because you've got the really big, like if you think a Disney animated character's eyes are big, I mean, look at anime. I mean, it's just like, it just shoots out there. Uh, um, but even though their eyes shoot out and they try to look kind of like all innocent and bubbly, they still have this eccentric, goofy zaniness to the way sometimes they're drawn or how they walk. Sometimes they'll even have colored hair. It's all very zany, but then at the same time there is this level of kind of innocence and sort of beauty that sometimes I think anime tries to accentuate. Um, but I think at the same time, I think it was initially trying to blend those two styles, though, of trying to be very comedic and zany, and goofy, while also trying to have some kind of beauty and deeper meaning and thought. So again, that's really, I think, the three kinds of main styles that you will see of animation. And again, there is kind of there is obviously ones that are definitely kind of in between and somewhere within this kind of, I guess you could say, zany and artistic spectrum. But I think that's really largely how it works. And it's really interesting because when you really look at how all the different styles and the way in which somebody could be drawn to look like a certain character, it's very fascinating, and it gives you a really in-depth perspective of how much effort and much creativity is behind making animation, because there's a lot more than just one particular style, because you just look at how varied these styles are. But again, what these styles accentuate is, I think, along this artistic comedic spectrum, and the artistic being more Disney style and the comedic zany being more DreamWorks style, or if you were back in the 1950s, the Looney Tunes. So that kind of a spectrum is really, when you look at animation, really where it falls under. Like, you can kind of almost tell too, like, if you really look into depth into what the character kind of looks like, you can kind of see, yeah, that's a little bit more on the comedic end, or yeah, that is a little bit more artistic, that's a little bit more in depth. That's something that's, trying to be a little bit more dramatic. um, but yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this particular topic. It's very fascinating, and I love to hear what people's favorite styles are out there. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care.